Hey, what's poppin'? I'm Chad, and it's Comic Core Friday night, and we are with a special panel tonight. I hope you guys enjoy the panel. We got this a little bit of a smaller, more intimate setting with the panel guest, and I'm going to start off right with the guy that just got done doing a live show, none other than the hottest thing on YouTube, Comics with Bueller.
Chad, you need to be watching some other stuff on YouTube because I am not the hottest. There's a lot more hot stuff out there than me. But hey, thanks for having me on tonight. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm excited to have our special guest, and I appreciate everybody joining. And let's have a good time.
My brother from another mother, the Midwest presser, the best in the game, Midwest comic book man, Uncle Paulie. Hit me up.
How's it going, Chad? And everybody in the chat. Thanks for coming to spend out a little time with us on Friday night, because we know everybody likes to go out. And if you're here with us, we appreciate it. We're ready to have a good time.
And the hottest, well, the best show on Thursday night, if you like to sip some suds, comics and cold ones, none other than JP. What up?
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here tonight. Talk some indie books with an indie creator. It's going to be a good show.
The eyebrow-raising, pie-eating, jabroni-beating, step on the gas, he's going to whoop your ass, none other than Carson Wood. C. Wood 19, what is
up? How's it going? Glad to be here another Friday night, 10 p.m. Eastern. Just happy to get this show on the road.
And our special guest, one of the co-founders of Action Lab Comics, he's brought you some of the greatest books, such as Fracture. He's done art on none other than Zombie Tramp. The man, we have to welcome our very, 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 very first, and hope not the last, special guest, Chad Cicconi. How are you, Chad?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I hope I live up to all the hype of being your first guest.
Oh, well,
this is a lot of pressure.
Don't worry. Nobody watches us anyway.
I got to pretend I'm interesting for a couple of hours.
So we have a live chat going. Guys, if you're in the chat, please don't hesitate to ask questions. We'll get to them. I'm going to turn it over to none other than the panel themselves. Paulie, take us away.
All right, so let's start it. You were there at the beginning of Action Labs. Kind of give us the 5-minute spiel on how it was created. What part of the market you're looking for. What's your niche?
Action Lab was created by 4 comic creators. Its birth occurred at a hotel bar in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the Sunday evening after Heroes Convention in 2010. It was myself, Dave DeWanch, another one of Action Lab's founders, and at the time an independent comics creator, Sean Pryor, who is one of the founders and one of the owners of Action Lab and has worked with us on and off since then, and Dave Wachter, who ended up not joining us at the time because he had another gig, but he was involved in all of the discussions over a few beers at the hotel bar, and our conversation was basically lamenting the fact that we were all creating our own independent comics, essentially alone, each of us, and we were whining about how we felt our reach was limited when we were doing comics by ourselves. We were saying that we were all selling the same 300 copies of every book we put out to the same 300 people, and we couldn't get any traction to expand that, or we were trying to figure out ways to get traction to expand that. And our thought was, well, wait a minute, if we join forces, and I'll edit your book and you edit my book, and I'll letter your book, and I'll take your book with me to shows and you take my book with you, we'll quadruple our scope, each of us, and it'll benefit all of us. And I happen to be a lawyer for my day job, so I said, well, why go halfway? Why don't we start our own little company? And Sean Pryor had kind of the gift of promotion, so we said, you be the president, and Dave, you can be the creative director. And I think we all thought at the time that it was just the beer talking, and that we were never really going to do it. 2 weeks later, I shot an email chain around, and we decided, let's do it. And Dave Dwanch drew a little logo and came up with the name Action Lab, the double meaning of sort of a laboratory plus the Labrador Retriever, our logo, the Labrador with the jetpack on it. I formed the company as a legal entity, and the one best decision I ever made is I had a buddy of mine, also from near Brownsville, Chad, named Brian Seaton, who's sort of an entrepreneurial guy, a businessman, and a comic fan, although not a creator at the time. And I asked him if he wanted to get involved, and we started the company. And in our first year, we had, through a combination of really hard work and some ridiculous luck, that got us an Eisner nomination in the first year of our operation and kind of put us on the map. We've had more success over the last 8 years than any of us had anticipated, and we're larger than we ever thought we would be. We're bouncing around the edge of the top 10 or at least the top 20 in terms of comic companies that are distributed through Diamond. So we've just adjusted our dreams to be bigger and bigger as things went on.
So before we jump to the next panel guest, I want to give a shout out to the chat. We have Miss Hustle. We have the brothers from the Blasted or Stash It crew, Jason Smith, Midwest Comic Book Ball and Chain. I think. Okay.
You froze there for a second, Chad.
We've got the great legend. Kakarot is on the show. Brett Hess. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing anything. HME3. Comics Misexplained. Real Comic Book Talk. And Pope Grimy is here. Travis Roberts is on here. Brian Spaceboy 227 and Crawford Mason. Thank you guys for joining the chat. Bueller, I know you had some questions. Do you mind?
Yeah. So this is for Action Labs Chad, because we have two Chads on the panel, so it's going to be a little confusing. So is it okay if I call you Action Labs Chad? Does that work?
I'll answer to that, yeah.
Okay, good deal. So I'm just curious, how many titles are you guys putting out per month right now?
I think we have at least 8 or 10 titles a month. I mean, it's gotten to the point where we're in the hundreds of books that we have published since we started. I also neglected to mention there was one other person who was key, and the last of the founders of Action Lab, a gentleman named Sean Gabarine, who had his own little company called, I want to say, Angry Gnome Comics. He was putting out a lot of horror comics, and he wasn't there in Charlotte with us, but we got him on board before we started the thing. So he was the last of the founders, and he's still working with us now. But it's gotten out of hand. I mean, I knew we had something when the number of titles we were publishing was beyond the amount that I could read.
Oh, that's awesome. I was curious, what's your guys' number one or top couple of titles?
We have a number of titles, and ironically, they're completely diametrically opposed in terms of their subject matter. Our original largest title, the one that got us the Eisner nomination in our first year, was Princeless by Jeremy Whitley. Princeless, Jeremy had a version of Princeless before he brought it to Action Lab with an artist, and he wasn't satisfied with the art, and Dave Dwanch kind of hooked him up with another artist through Action Lab, and Princeless was our first biggest title, and it remains one of our best sellers on the all ages side. A few years into Action Lab, we started a mature readers line called the Action Lab Danger Zone, and its biggest title is Zombie Tramp. Mm-hmm. And the irony is that Zombie Tramp and Princeless remain some of our biggest sellers. We've subsequently one of the few licensed books we have is we're doing a book called Miraculous, The Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir, based on the popular TV show that came over from Europe. That's also one of our biggest sellers. But Zombie Tramp and some of the Action Lab all ages titles are our consistent biggest sellers.
So you kind of, as far as like age groups, you cover every single thing down the list there with your adult content and the younger content and everything in the middle.
We tried to, and we try to be careful not to mix and mingle, which is why we created this separate publishing line, the Danger Zone. We have a different logo. We try to keep the sections in the Diamond catalog separate, and we're very careful when we're setting up at conventions to keep the mature reader stuff on one end of the table and the all ages stuff at the other. We usually kind of put our artists, whoever's featured at that convention, we put them in the middle as a buffer zone.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't expect a cross-company crossover.
Yeah, no crossovers on those.
Not with those titles. We do a lot of crossovers amongst some of our Danger Zone titles between them, but we won't be crossing over Zombie Tramp and Miraculous anytime soon.
Well, I have more questions, but I'm going to turn it over to someone else on the panel. Hopefully it comes back around. So whoever wants to go next, who's ever up, go for it.
Let's go with JP. He had a huge pile of Action Lab comics, and
Well, I think
fanboyed out a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
what's that?
I said you fanboyed out a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, I didn't know I was going to be on tonight, and I sure as heck didn't know you had a guest tonight. As far as like me being prepared, but for me, the biggest thing in our circle is the horror comics. As far as like my channel and what I do. One of my friends, my favorite people in all of comics, has done some work for you guys. Sora Sung has done some covers for you guys.
She's doing covers for my book right now.
Awesome. I love her to death. She's my best comic friend that I have out there, if you want to call it that. But she's adorable.
But she's amazingly talented too.
She certainly is. I have if you can see it behind me, there's my Miss Marvel commission she did for me. But anyways, so for me, the horror titles are huge. I usually go through previews, and I always hit up the independent section. Starting with Action Lab, obviously it's an A. But the big thing for me is I'm a father, and trying to get my kids into reading something. I mean, they're attracted to bright colors and things of that. So Miraculous has been huge because it has the TV following. But the other book that I find I actually enjoy reading to my kids is Hero Cats. It's just a fun little read. As a father, it's safe. And you're digging through my Zombie Tramp and Vamp Blade and Danger Dolls, Danger Doll Squad, Doll Face, all that stuff. It's nice to know that you guys are still keeping the emphasis on kids as well, because it's you don't see that a lot in the industry anymore. I did find it's on an Action Lab book, but it's another kid-friendly book that I talked about last night on my show. But I'm always looking for the all ages stuff, just because they are the future readers of our hobby. And I have enough kids here that I can probably keep a shop in business if I can get them all, reading. So that's the future there. We'll keep the hobby going. But anyways, I just, I want to say I appreciate that as a father, that you guys have that in mind, and just keep growing from there and see what that does. And, Princeless, I probably late to the party on that book. But I believe that one was also optioned, correct?
It is. We have signed a licensing deal with Sony, and as far as we know, they're moving forward with production. We're waiting to hear whether the movie gets a final green light or not. But that was announced, I want to say, San Diego last year.
Yeah, it's been a while. I just remember it,
Yeah, it's been around a year, I think, that they've had it, but these things move very slowly.
Yes, I learned. We had Colin Bunn on our show 2 weeks ago, and he had kind of talked about the whole process with stuff. Because he write some books for you guys?
I want to say yes, but I can't.
Yeah, he's written like 1 billion books, so I can't even keep track of all of it. But anyways, I just kind of wanted to take a moment to appreciate what you guys are doing for the industry.
We're actually doubling down on the all ages books. We have I mentioned that we have a separate publishing line for the mature reader stuff. We're launching and I've forgotten the specific name they've given it, but we're launching on a sort of kid-focused, younger readers line to sort of bookend the whole comic spectrum that we produce.
Well, that'd be great.
And that's important for the book market. An increasing portion of the sales are coming from the book market and avenues outside the Diamond catalog.
Well, the day that I see some Action Lab in the Scholastic book ordering guide will be a good day from the school.
We're in there. Yeah,
That's awesome.
We've had books in there.
I'm gonna look. I think I just got one from school today, so that'll be exciting to talk about right here live. But yeah, if someone else wants to take some questions and speak with Mr. Action Lab.
I will jump into the chat. Legend's texting me and telling me that there's some great questions in the chat. Guys, I apologize. I was just listening to Chad talk. If I haven't gotten to your chat, your question, please resend it. I know Brian had a awesome, according to Legend, had an awesome question. Brian Spaceboy, he says that he loved Action Labs. Still wish he had them, but I'm going to have to start working on my Bernie Wrightson. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Guys, if you guys see anybody in the chat, please don't hesitate to jump in. I've got LP who is at work who wants to jump in at some point.
So there's a question I saw on here that for Action Lab, Chad. This is from Real Comic Book Talk. So what are your new goals since you're becoming bigger than you expected?
Well, our CEO, I ask him that periodically, and the last time I asked him that, he said he wants to buy Disney at some point.
That's a pretty bold statement to put out there, but it's a good goal to have.
Well, and that's half facetious, but the real answer is we want to keep growing. We want to consistently, we've cracked the top 10. If you just look at Diamond sales numbers, depending on which month, we're number 10, number 15, number 12, or in that range. We'd like to consistently sort of move up the ladder into the realm of, we're not Image Comics yet, but we'd like to get in there when people, talk about Boom Studios or some of the other top of the second tier publishers. We want our name to be thought of and mentioned right alongside those people, because we've been here closing in on 10 years now. We officially started putting out books in late 2010 2011, but we were in the formation stages earlier than that, so we're approaching our 10-year anniversary here, and that's a feat that not a lot of independent comic companies make. There's plenty of independent comic companies that have been formed at around the time we were, or since then, that are no longer around. So we just want to keep getting bigger and bigger and eat the world someday.
That's awesome. I think Seawood, I think you're up, my friend. Take it away.
Yeah, I always like to ask other creators, what got you into comics? How do you go from being, a lawyer to a comic creator? Like, kind of take us through that, I suppose.
He wanted to be liked.
He had a few drinks at a hotel bar.
Well, it started before that. I've read comics from the time I can recall reading, and I've always been a doodler. I was a good student. I was a bookworm and a nerd, but if you look through my notes, they were always full of doodles in the margins and superheroes and cars and rockets and stuff all over the place. So I always kind of had it in the back of my mind that if I had decided to try to be an artist professionally versus going into my degree program and then going into law school, I always thought, I think I might have been able to draw comics. But I think about 11 or 12 years ago, maybe 2006 or 2007, the other thing is I'm a night owl. I'm up till midnight or 1 every night, and my wife and kids are in bed at 9:30 or 10. And so I was playing video games or watching movies and in my mind wasting that time. So in about 2006, I said to myself, well, why don't I try to do something productive? I'm going to go to every bookstore I can find and buy every art book or how to make comics book, and just try to will myself to go from a doodler who I think I can draw pretty well to somebody who can actually draw a comic book. And I started doing that, and I went on a couple of web forums and tried to reach out to a couple of comics writers and say, hey, does anybody have a little 3-page script or a 5-page script that I could work on practicing how to do sequential work? And I hooked up with somebody, and we did a few 3-page series and started posting them on various places and getting good feedback. And then it kind of snowballed from there. The first thing I had published was a book called Baby Boomers, or a series called Baby Boomers. It got picked up by Marcosia in 2007 or 2008. And then I hooked up with Sean Pryor and was doing some stuff for a company that he had called PKD Media. Did a couple of books that I don't even like to go back and look at this point because my art has improved or changed so much since then. But those were kind of my first baby steps. But I've been reading comics since I was, 5.
Chad, your first book, Fractured, it I know there was a little bit of a hiccup with Diamond when I think the second book came out before the first book.
Yeah.
But that book actually got me introduced me to Action Labs, and I followed it all the way through the Action Verse. And the Action Verse was unique to me because, I mean, you're taking an entity that you guys have built over, and like you said, 10 years at the time, and you made your own Avengers essentially. And how difficult was that process essentially?
It was logistically difficult, but artistically working with all the other creators was not difficult at all. I mean, we had a couple of conference calls, not unlike this one, to plot and plan where we were going and outline the story. And then from there, we all just went to our neutral corners and drew our book. And it was an honor for me to get to draw some other people's characters and have our characters that sprang out of Fracture be one of the main villains or the main villain in that Actionverse storyline. And to get to draw Jamal Eigel's Molly Danger, which was another big hit for Action Lab when Jamal brought that to us. And I thought one of the greatest superhero books I'd read in a long time. To get to draw her on a couple of pages of the issue that I got to do as part of Actionverse was a huge honor. And it felt a little validating to me that I was at least sort of in the game and participating with other professional comics artists who are better than me, dragging me forward in progress of improving my art and viewing myself a little more professionally.
I mean, so with that being said, what do you have on the horizon? I mean, I know you shared with us and the panel, and we can go through it. I know Bueller and Carson and Paul all got to see some of the upcoming artwork and some of the projects you're working. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what's in the future for Action Labs?
Sure. I've done a number of books for Action Labs. From Fracture was one of the first books we did, and then I did a book that very few people read 2 years ago called Blue Hour that I thought was pretty good. And I have an upcoming book that's issue 1 is in the November previews, solicited for the November previews for release in January. It's called The Null Fairies, and the 10-second elevator pitch is it's Tinkerbell meets Silence of the Lambs.
That was a pretty accurate representation of what I read.
This is the first book that I've actually written myself. For all of my earlier projects, I've worked with good writers. Sean Gabarine wrote the Fracture, both volumes, and I worked with other writers on the other projects. But I've had this story kind of kicking around my head for probably upwards of 10 years, since before Action Lab started. I just never thought my art was good enough, or I never thought I was ambitious enough to do it. I finally just rolled up my sleeves and said, I'm going to do it. It took me 4 years to do 6 issues, but it's finally in the can now, just dotting the I's and crossing the T's. The first 2 issues are completely done and ready to be solicited. The third one's being colored right now, and I have some of the lettering I have to get done, but it will be out on time, and I'm excited to get it out into the world since it's been in my head for so long.
So I'm going to give a quick shout out to Rich the Third, who is posing as Crawford Mason, and some of the other people that are in the chat. Let's roll out to Paulie. What's going on?
Let's see. I've got so many questions, but one that comes up for me is Action Labs seems to be one of the first adopters of the whole digital side of comics. And I read on your Wikipedia page you actually were the first one to release a digital only free comic book day book. What do you see as the future of digital comics? I mean, because there's a lot of talk in the community about it. People are like, oh, digital's going to take over and they're going to get rid of print. And there's people like me who say, I'm never going to not want to hold that book in my hands. Just on a high level and within the company, where do you guys see that going?
I think digital is going to keep growing slowly, and it is growing very, very slowly by my observation. It is. I don't see much danger of digital completely displacing print anytime soon. Or digital hovers under 10% of our total sales, if my reckoning is correct. Now, I'm not directly involved in the accounting, but I do see some of the reports that cross the desk, and it's steady. It's slowly growing by, small percentage points year over year, as I see it, but it's not by any means in danger of eating all of the sales. So I think the reports of the demise of the print comic industry are greatly exaggerated. I think the bigger risk is that the book market or other avenues of distribution are going to erode the direct market and destabilize a lot of comic shops' ability to continue without a lot of creative effort.
So, Trav, it's back to you, my man.
So I have a question. So you're an artist, you're a writer as well, and I'm always curious about the relationship between a writer and an artist and how they come together to form one entity. Can you kind of elaborate on that? Since you've had your hand in both fields, how does that work? That's always something I've wondered, how someone was able to put pen to paper, write a story, and then someone comes and draws and makes that happen. So what's your thoughts?
I think it's similar to the relationship between an author and a movie director, in that the writers I've worked with, I've usually worked in full script style. Do you guys know the difference between full script and Marvel style?
Marvel's more, just they kind of give you a broad strokes kind of view.
Marvel style, the comic writer would give almost just an outline. Page 1, here's what needs to happen. Page 2, here's what needs to happen. Or even more rudimentary than that, and just trust the artist to lay it out and plot it out. And then the writer would come back at the end and overlay the dialogue write the dialogue after looking at the panels. Full script is essentially the writer would produce a movie-like script. Panel 1, exterior, daylight, street scene, character 1 towering over character 2 with his fist balled up. Character 1 says this, character 2 says this. And literally it would be that level of detail. I'm told that Alan Moore's scripts were novels with pages and pages describing each panel for the artist to just try to interpret the great detail that was put down in the script. So there's a continuum of ways that a writer and an artist can work together. I worked with Sean Gabrion on Fracture and a couple of other things in sort of a loose script. He would do a full panel script, but there was room for interpretation. And if I had an idea that might change the panel order or require a change in dialogue, all I had to do was just send him an email or pick up the phone and call Sean, and we would just work it out. He and I worked together on character designs as well. He gave me ideas, and I would work up sketches and character designs. for the book that I'm finishing up now that I wrote myself, I trusted myself enough to work Marvel style. So I just did an outline for myself, and I did a lot of composing as I was drawing the comic. But a writer certainly has to have a lot of trust in an artist to work like that.
So, Chad, we have a special guest. He's one of our panel members. He's the creator of Niobe Comics, none other than Larry LP. What's up? Okay.
Well, he's at work, so
he's at work. He might be checking a guest in, but we're gonna dive back into Carson, if you don't mind. I know you got to see some of Chad's upcoming work on. So, do you mind maybe talking to it?
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed that. So thank you for sending out that link so we could get a sneak peek on that. I think the fairies meet Silence of the Lambs is a pretty good description of that. So that was a very awesome read. But I do want to get the one question in the chat real quick. Once again, from Real Comic Book Talk. He says, can someone ask what his favorite run is so far? So I guess, what's your favorite run of a comic you have worked on through Action Labs?
Oh, my favorite run of a comic I've worked on. Well, I enjoyed. I'm biased in looking at my own art, so I'm always going to like the most recent thing because I'm not a full-time artist. I'm a full-time lawyer, and I do art for 2 hours in the evening after my family goes to bed. So my style continues to evolve and improve as I get better on perspective and anatomy and everything else. So I'm always going to tell you that my favorite thing is the last thing I worked on. So I think the Null Fairies, in terms of my artwork, is the best thing I've worked on to date. But in terms of my favorite, I'm always going to have a soft spot for the first volume of Fracture, simply because that was the book that we submitted to Diamond in order to see if we would get listed in the catalog in 2010. So that always, I'm always going to get to brag a little bit about the fact that before Action Lab was even a real company, one of the hardest things for a tiny little independent comics company to do to get recognized is to get in the Diamond catalog. And I drew the book that got Action Lab in the Diamond catalog. So I'm always going to have to say that's at least my second favorite.
So I just got a thumbs up from LP himself. Chad, you did a cover of for Zombie Tramp. This guy has used one of the other cover artists for his book, Niobe Comics. Larry, it's all yours, man.
Well, first, I just want to say, Chad, thanks for coming on the show, and it's an honor to have you here. I'm actually at my day job right now, and I'm like trying to sneak in so I can hang out and talk to you for a bit. I really want to be on the panel full time tonight. I might be in and out as customers come, but it is.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's almost midnight here, and I'm on the east coast of Canada, and I work at a hotel. So sometimes it's quiet, sometimes not so much. But let me tell you something. I'm a huge fan of the Action Lab Danger Zone line. That's how I got into Action Lab, and it started with a book called Dollface, which is like hilarious and fun. And then Dollface, led me down the trail to Vamp Blade and Zombie Tramp, and those other great books, and Danger Doll Squad, where you group the three together. Now I know that Dan Mendoza is phenomenal. I collect his artwork. I buy his exclusives. He's been doing work for other indies, like for Tom Hutchison and Penny for Your Soul, and Brian Polito's Lady Death. I was wondering if you can just chat us up a little bit about Dan Mendoza and maybe some of the other people that have worked with for you. Like Chad mentioned, R.B. White, who does the covers for me. He's done covers for Zombie Tramp and Danger Doll Squad. And you also had who I think is a phenomenal artist in Colette Turner, who lives in my city, actually. Very nice girl. Her and John are wonderful people. She's had beautiful covers for you guys, too, man. If you could maybe hit on those three artists, that'd be awesome.
Sure. I actually don't know those two artists that you mentioned very well. I've seen their covers, and I know that we worked with them. There's another artist who does a lot of covers for Zombie Tramp. His name is Bill McKay, who I do know pretty well and is a friend of mine. I've been sort of tabled with him at a number of conventions. I have actually gotten to do 2 Zombie Tramp covers. They let me out of the cave to do a Zombie Tramp cover once a year, basically. And I've done 2 or maybe 3 Dollface covers. Um, but I did get to table next to Dan Mendoza at the New York Comic Con 2 years ago. That was the first time I met him, and he's just the nicest, friendliest, funniest guy you'd ever want to meet. And if you closed your eyes and imagined the guy who might write Zombie Tramp, you would imagine Dan. He has exactly that sense of humor, and the way he interacted with the folks coming up and wanting to get his artwork and wanting to get commissions from him just was a joy to be around. I just got to bask in his reflected fame there for a couple of days at New York. But he's just a fun guy, and I'm very pleased to see that we have been able to help him expand his reach. Zombie Tramp existed before Action Lab. He produced, I think, some independently by himself, and I want to say maybe he worked with Super Real Graphics. When we were first starting the Danger Zone line, we brought on board a creator called Jason Martin, who had his own line of comics called, I think they were called Super Real Graphics, and he had put out a number of titles. But again, he was kind of running it by himself and had some limitations on the scope. And we brought him on board, and he's now kind of the manager of our Danger Zone line and has been for a number of years. And I think he is the way we got hooked up with Dan Mendoza somehow through that connection. And the fact that we've been able to help Dan continue and expand his Zombie Tramp comic and make it bigger and better with I guess the latest issue 56 or 57, he's doing a big transition in the title. The original woman who was Zombie Tramp is dying or discontinuing, and there's going to be a new woman with the mantle of Zombie Tramp. So that title is going to continue, and we've been able to expand the Danger Zone line. And my friend Brian Seaton was one of the creators and writes some of the Dollface books, and the other ones you mentioned are just fun titles.
Yeah, they're incredibly funny. I love them. And if anyone hasn't read Zombie Tramp before, one question here, and I'll give it back to the panel to go back to work. But I mean, there's sexy covers, right? I mean, there's some great sexy artwork. And as a guy who does sexy covers myself, sometimes I get criticized for having those sexy covers. How does Action Lab as a company handle some of the criticism that might come out at you over the material that you might produce on a Kickstarter or on a risque book, if you will?
We take meticulous pains to label everything we produce, whether it's mature readers and make sure it's marketed to the correct audience. We're staunch and steadfast in that we believe all types of comics should be produced, and there's audiences for everything. There's a lot of people who don't like that sort of cheesecakey art, and let's admit it. It has an aspect of TNA, and there's a long history of that in art and in comics, and we think that's as legitimate a form of expression as anything else. And as long as we market it correctly, and we're not trying to put those books in the hands of kids, and we are clear on the covers and on the labels and in the solicitations as to what is the content of the book, we think they can and should be produced. Like I was saying earlier before you got on the line, we have an all ages line, which is some of the best books that I would put in the hands of any child, boy or girl, of any age, and we just take great care to make sure those come out under the Action Lab title or our upcoming Action Lab Young Readers line. And as long as you're honest and label everything that you're producing correctly, we don't see a problem with that content.
I love the covers, and I thank you for answering my question, sir. And hopefully I can jump back in a little bit.
So I'm going to give a special shout out to none other than Pittsburgh Comics, Colin McMahon, wanted to gave me a thumbs up and tell Chad, you're doing a great job.
That's my local store.
So, so Chad, I'm going to ask you this. I know you're from the area. Where was your local store growing up?
Well, you're going to make me expose my age. I grew up before there were comic stores. There was no local store. My local store was a spinner rack at the National Record Mart in the Uniontown Mall, where when my mom took me there on a Saturday, she would give me $5 and I would get 3 comics, a pretzel, an Orange Julius, and go to the toy store and get 3 more comics in a plastic sleeve that they used to bag, and I would like slide it to the side so I could try to see what the middle one was. So I would come home with 6 or 7 comics and a pretzel and an Orange Julius from the mall, and I would be a happy 12-year-old.
So Chad, real quick,
the first comic shop I ever frequented was when I went to college. When I went to college at West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia, and there was a store there at the time called Craig's Comics, and I still know Craig, and I see him. He doesn't run that store anymore, but I see him at least annually at a little comics convention in Morgantown, West Virginia, and he comes up to my table and we reminisce about comics in the 80s. I bought The Dark Knight off the rack in single issues, baby.
So I think most of us on this panel have that book off the panel. I mean, off the spinner rack. But Chad, who as an artist, who influenced you the most?
I like clean line work and traditional style. So I'm going to name people like Adam Hughes, John Byrne, Art Adams, Alan Davis. Those are the people who were producing comics when I was consuming them a lot. And those were the people whose line hit my eye and made my brain sing.
So who are you reading right now?
I'm reading very little right now, unfortunately, because I'm so busy trying to produce my own work. I pick up something here or there. I must admit, I grew up on loving both Marvel and DC, but I read precious little of either company right now. Those are like a soap opera, so you see the same stories repeated every 5 years in a cycle. So I pick up a lot of independent stuff, and I can't remember the last thing. My wife just bought me a giant edition of Beowulf that I have here on my table ready to start. Beautiful. And the art in this looks amazing. But that's what I just pick up a graphic novel here or there, something that jumps off of the stand into my eye.
So I'm gonna I wanted to stick because I am Captain Segway. There was news that came out of New York today, and I wanted your opinion, and basically, I want Carson's opinion because he and I share a character on this that is very special and dear to our hearts. Brian Bendis is taking over Young Justice, exclusive only to Walmart. And I can tell you from my LCSs, they're not happy.
I can imagine. I think we're going to see more and more of this as different avenues of distribution start to open up. What was that thing we just saw? DC did some sort of giant size thing that was it Walmart or was it?
Yeah, that was Walmart as well.
If it's sold, they're going to do more of it, and Walmart's going to want it to be exclusive, and DC is not going to turn, or companies are not going to turn down those sales. So I think it's inevitable we're going to see more of this. I mean, we were talking about the Scholastic catalog earlier, maybe before we started recording, but there's another avenue. The book market is expanding. The library market is expanding for comics. So it's we're just going to see more and more of this. And my opinion of it is irrelevant. I like the comic shop. I like going in there. I like walking up to that wall and just being bombarded with all those images and colors and trying to sift through and pick out something that jumps out at me. But I think the world is just changing.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, we not too long ago had a comic shop owner on, and I had asked him, I said, can a comic shop survive today without getting into gaming? And he said no.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah, I mean, I go on to the day. Most of the time when I go to a store these days, I mean, back when I used to work at a comic book store in the late 80s, early 90s, and you know, you walk in a comics book store and you would see 200 long boxes full of back issues. Now it's all gaming tables.
Carson, what do you think about our boy Connor?
Like I said, we'll see. I did post a link in our chat previously today. I'm slightly nervous about it, but hopefully Bendis can bring some of the Ultimate Spider-Man magic over to DC. I think that'd be a good opportunity in Young Justice. And I believe, who is the artist on that one? Pat Gleason, I think. I really like his work, so I'm looking forward to it, to be honest. I didn't hear that it was a Walmart exclusive, but luckily I work right next to a Walmart, so hopefully I can get a copy of it.
Well, a lot of people didn't know it was a Walmart exclusive, except for the LCSs got an email right after the announcement was made from DC saying, I apologize, but this is a Walmart exclusive. So I learned the information from my LCS. I mean, Trav, what do you think? I mean, Jan and Zane are in the Young Justice, and they're going to be at Walmart.
Well, here's the thing. Years ago, all comic books were in all stores. They were in the convenience store. They were in grocery stores. They were in the local Walmarts, you know, and then they went away, okay? And then they were just in comic shops. The more that we can get comics into a mainstream retailer like a Walmart, okay, which is the biggest retailer that there is, even though it's an exclusive, it's the better it does for the whole industry because it opens up eyes. It's sitting on the shelf next to other items that people buy every day. So I understand that the frustration for a local comic shop, but for the overall general, it's a good thing. And that's the kind of way you have to look at it because it is a business. And I think Chad would agree with me on this. The more visibility it gets, and especially in a Walmart, the better it is.
Well, and like Chad, I'm kind of from the same generation as Chad. You know, he had mentioned when he grew up, it was the spinner rack at the store. When comic stores first started out, that's what they were, was back issues. There was no direct market. That was their thing. People wanted to find back issues. And I think you're kind of going to see a return to that. You're going to see these stores that do gaming, and some of them will have back issues because there definitely is still a market for that. That's all I buy anymore. You know, I'm a Golden and Silver Age collector. I'm always looking for the older stuff.
And the sad reality is Walmart simply has the possibility of reaching an audience that will dwarf anything that would ever sales numbers that could ever be achieved in the direct market. Walmart is millions upon millions of people in a Walmart every day. So if you get something in a Walmart, you have an opportunity for sales that could dwarf what you're going to see for the same title in the direct market.
So
that's just a sad reality.
If the Walmart experiment works, you're going to see numbers like when Image first started with Youngblood 1 and stuff, where they were, selling 100, 200,000 of a issue.
Well, now, at least you have access to it. You have visibility. The number of people who are going to be walking by with eyes on your book is orders of magnitude greater than what you see in a comic shop. That's why people have to be creative, like Colin is at Pittsburgh Comics. To
I mean, these days I look at the numbers and you look at I think like selling 10,000 issues for Marvel is a success, whereas back in the 90s that was canceled.
Hey, Paulie, Uncle Paulie, I gotta go with what Chad said. He made a comment about our local, and it's my local LCS too. I show love to new nerds, cards, and comics, but honestly, Pittsburgh Comics is where I've been getting my books for probably the past 12 years. Colin he gets everything. And you're talking about covers. And I know some of the guys on this panel have asked me to pick up a certain cover for them, and I was able to do that. Now, Colin, it hits him in his pocket, and I get that. But at the end of the day, when as a business owner for Action Labs, I'm going to do what makes me money. And I know all of us have talked about spec books and future books. If you can put a book on eBay and sell it for $250, Batman Damned, when I go to my LCS this week, after that book has been out for a week, and my LCS still sells it to me for $7.99, I'm happy.
And you're going to buy as many as you can.
But no, because he has the sign up. It says one per customer. But I mean, honestly, Chad, as a creator, as a business owner, as a co-founder of Action Labs, would you do an exclusive?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you have a choice but to explore avenues of distribution, particularly as a smaller, growing indie publisher. You know, we struggle to get purchases sometimes by the direct market. Now, we do everything we can. We reach out. We go to the Comics Pro meeting. We go to the Diamond retailer meetings. And obviously, the bulk of our sales remain through the direct market. So we want to partner with and keep the direct market as happy as possible. But you'd be negligent if you weren't exploring these other avenues like Scholastic and the library market and direct into Walmart or something. That if a company like Action Lab could get something direct into Walmart, that would be like a lightning strike.
Yeah.
In terms of the possibility of sales.
I think it's great that the big two like Marvel and DC could get themselves into a market where there's lots of kids, like you said, millions of eyeballs go in there every day. I worry about, though, if that does start to become a regular trend, what happens to our comic shops? We're already kind of in an era right now where there are more shops closing than there are opening. And another era that I want to ask Chad about here is the era of crowdfunding. Crowdfunding to me now seems to be on fire. And this is how I discovered Dollface, to be honest with you, was through a Kickstarter. Like when Dollface #1, before it was launched, there was a Kickstarter for it, ran by Dan Mendoza himself, I believe. And that's what kind of got me on board. Do you guys at Action Lab now still Kickstarter crowdfund books at all? And what's your thoughts on the rise of crowdfunding like Kickstarter and Indiegogo?
We do, and that's where my personal preference differs a little from our business model. We certainly don't kickstart every book or mandate anything relative to Kickstarter, but the company has had to or has embraced Kickstarter as a legitimate means of. I see it less as crowdfunding at this point than as pre-selling your book. It's a way to directly reach out to your market and guarantee a certain level of sales, which has the effect of funding the book. But really, when you look at what you're doing, is you're just pre-selling the book, basically. I don't like it because it's a lot of work. I'd rather be spending that time drawing or doing something to improve the book itself. But it's a tremendous amount of work. I have not kickstarted the Null Fairies, but I'm not somebody trying to make their living as an artist. I work as a lawyer and have the luck to have enough money that I can pay a letterer or pay the colorist out of my pocket. So Kickstarter is not a necessity for me. If I was somebody who was 25 years old and trying to be a full-time artist, where am I going to get the money to pay for a letterer? Where am I going to get the money to pay for a colorist? So in that instance, a company like Action Lab that produces creator-owned books, where our typical business model isn't a creator brings us an unfinished book and we pay an artist, creators usually bring us a finished book. Like there's exceptions to that, and we have different things different types of agreements we have used over the years. But the most common is the creator brings us a finished book. So for a lot of creators, Kickstarter or Indiegogo or one of the other crowdfunding programs is a necessity, or they can't finish a professional quality, full colored, fully lettered book if you're a writer or if you're an artist or a penciler.
You answered
Yeah,
one of my questions.
I started my first 4 issues working on 5th. As a guy who works part-time, money short, and that's how you got to raise it. Do you see, though, like the crowdfunding Kickstarter platform as a viable source of marketing books?
Well, I think it's been around for 8 or 10 years now, and it's proven itself to be so. There's hits or misses. I mean, there's some people who do it wrong and give Kickstarters a bad name. People send in their $20 and then never get their book. But there's plenty of other success stories, like Dave Wachter, the guy who I was mentioning. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his work. He's doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Godzilla for Dark Horse, I want to say. He's a pretty good friend of mine, and he had an amazing book called The Guns of Shadow Valley, and he did a Kickstarter and complained because it was a great deal of work and fulfillment was a nightmare and logistics were crazy. But he got every one of those out the door, and it was an amazing piece of work. When I got mine in the mail, I was marveling at it, and he could never have produced that absent Kickstarter.
So you answered one of my questions when you said you guys generally deal with creator-owned stuff. But you had mentioned to us that your claim to fame was that Fracture was the book that got you guys into Diamond. And I think you guys did start your first couple books were like Kickstarter stuff.
Fracture, we did a Kickstarter for Fracture, yeah.
Yeah, what's the whole process? I mean, is there like some threshold you have to hit to get into Diamond, or do you just submit the book and say we sold this many copies? I mean, how does that work? Because I've talked to a number of people who do Kickstarters, and of course Larry has done his book through Kickstarter. I mean, what do you need before you go to Diamond and say, hey, look, can you run our book?
You know, you're taxing my memory. I actually don't remember. It was so long ago what the criteria was that Diamond used to select us to be in there. I know we had to submit the book. I don't remember whether we had to submit our Kickstarter details to see how many orders we had or anything like that. I just don't recall what the specific criteria was. I know it was an arduous process, and we were back and forth with them a number of times, and before we finally got the go ahead. But I don't remember specifically what their criteria were.
So Chad, I need to give a shout out to the chat. We have Brian Spaceboy, Miss Hustle are still hanging with us. Jason, the mailman, Brett Haas, and Crawford Mason, Rich. But I have to give you guys my newest friends, none other than Anthony from Real Comic Book Talk.
What's up?
I'm glad I finally get to be on live with you guys.
How you guys doing today?
We're doing well, Anthony. How's DC treating you?
Well, traffic still stuck, so getting ready to record our video for the Venom review because we all just finished watching it.
But I saw where you were extremely active in the chat. Would you like to ask Mr. Cicconi a question?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, nice to meet you.
Same here.
My daughter loves Miraculous, like, a lot. Like, I had to watch Netflix, and I had to buy her the books.
Good to hear.
She gets expensive. Is there anything I see? Like when I was at the con, Baltimore con, that with the Miraculous books, you have like 2 different kinds of art. You have ones that look like it came directly from Netflix, and then another one that looks just like a regular comic book would. How do you determine which is which, or how you going to do each artist with each book?
Well, they're two separate storylines. The photo plays or photo novels really are just adaptations of the episodes of the TV show. They're literally taken from high-res screen grabs and designed into a comic book, which is a different storytelling talent in and of itself. It's not a trivial thing to just pull the right images and get them lettered and everything. That's not easy to do, but we have a number of trades of that, and those will just ride along with the TV show. As new episodes are produced, we will continue to produce those. Those are just sort of book versions of the shows. But since we got the license to do that book, they always wanted us, and it took us longer to ramp it up, to do original stories, hand-drawn traditional comic book stories that aren't just retellings of the episodes. So the new line, we have one trade's worth of it out, and the second trade is being produced right now, is original comic stories that are written by a combination of people who are working with Action Lab and the people who do and created the TV show. They supply a lot of the ideas, and any of the ideas that our folks come up with have to be run by and approved by them. Obviously, they own the license and own the characters. So it's going to continue to be two parallel, as I understand it. I'm not directly involved in editorial, but I hear things. I think it's going to continue to be two discrete lines. We're going to have the screen grab produced books that will continue along with the TV show, and the original hand-drawn ones will be supplemental stories about, obviously, in that universe and with the same characters, and to go along or fit in between the episodes of the TV show. So hopefully the audience of the show will like at least one of the two.
So what you're saying is, since my daughter watches the Netflix show, all I got to do is get the hand drawn new stories. Then that will help save some money.
I'm saying she needs to buy everything, but but if you just want to get the original material, we'd be thrilled if she continued to read that.
So she needs to read more.
Now you know, and just coming over her head like from the 80s. So we're hitting that hour mark. We're kind of telling down. I'm going to go through the panel, ask what you're reading. What was your hot book of the week? We'll start off with C. Wood. What you got?
I think I'm going to have to go with Dead Rabbit #1 as my pick of the week. This is a new one from Jerry Duggan. I think I talked about a little bit of this on Wednesday. Basically, it's about a couple killers / thieves. They're retired from that way of life, but unfortunately, they've kind of spent all of their thieving money. So now the main guy on the cover there, he is more or less working as a Walmart greeter. He originally started the job as a way to kind of pickpocket people and maybe get a few extra bucks and maybe thieve the Walmart. But since, in his words, everybody uses credit cards, he actually just kept the part-time job to earn money. So he decides to, kind of scope out people and see, try to pick out the bad people and then go after them. And that's kind of where the first issue kind of leaves us off at. So pretty solid read so far, I think, this week. And then also a special shout out to Magic Order #4. Really enjoyed this issue as well.
So LP, I will make it quick with you. I'm assuming it's Niobe #1.
No, it's Avani #1.
Oh, that's right.
Avani #1 is what we're working on now as the next Kickstarter. Hopefully we're launching that Halloween or shortly after. But as far as what I'm reading Kickstarter books. I'm reading Penny for Your Soul #3 from Tom Hutchinson. I got Into the Suck recently just arrived from CB Zane. Of course, I read Action Lab, Danger Zone stuff. And so I continue to do my thing, and I love reading other people's work, and I love networking. Hopefully, Chad, Action Lab Chad, I can reach out to you sometime and maybe show you what we got going on.
So LP's hang loose for the after show, the quick hangout. We'll go to my brother from another mother who has helped me out essentially 20 times this week. especially today when you know what I'm talking about, Uncle Paulie.
Only 20? Well, I mean, everybody knows I really don't usually read my books till the weekend, so I'm not trying to just butter up the guest here, but my book so far that you guys got to wait till January for is No Fairies #1.
That's awesome.
I dug it. I thought it was really good. I mean, you can read it on a couple different levels. I mean, I know we haven't gone too much into detail of it, but I mean, you can see where, you know, someone younger could pick up this book, and then as an adult, you can see some of the broad strokes where you're seeing some of the, you know, I see things of class warfare and things like that, you know. So I mean, it's a multi-level book, and it has a lot of good things in it. So I think you all should pick it up in January.
Actually, I'll interrupt for a second. There is going to be a 10-page preview that is going to be part of Action Lab's Halloween. There's like a free comic book day thing on Halloween.
Halloween Comic Fest.
Yeah, Action Lab has a book in that, and the Null Fairies #1. It's the first 10 pages of it, or 10 pages of it, are going to be included in that as a preview. So you don't have to wait completely till January.
So in that 10 pages, since we talked about it earlier, you are going to get the big twist that happens in issue 1.
Yeah, I think so. And at the end, if you got a minute, I'll give a little bit longer of a pitch for it.
We're coming
a little
to
bit more
you,
detail.
We're gonna come to you, my brother from Pittsburgh Comics, but we're gonna dive right into my brother from DC. What's happening?
So, well, I didn't get to read most of my books, but I did get to read the new Justice League #9 from Zack Snyder.
Was it hot?
Yeah, just another banger. Just a regular banger. Another great stuff. But yeah, I didn't get to read the rest of them, so it may change by the end of tomorrow.
Bueller, you are the man who we heard what you picked. I mean, geez, you're picking books from like 3 weeks from now.
What? So anyway, Action Labs, Chad. All right. So I live in Portland, Oregon, okay, which is home of Dark Horse, home of Image Comics, home of Oni Press. Independent books are very big here. They've been like that from day one. Dark Horse has been there from day one, downtown Milwaukee. I don't know if you've ever visited or whatnot, but and I got a chance to read your book today. I was very happy to read it, and I loved it for the fact that I didn't know anything about it. And going into something fresh and not knowing what to expect always leaves a good impression. And I really enjoyed your book from the beginning to end. I just sat there and I just read it like an hour ago, or like maybe a little bit longer than that. But I sat there and I read it and I was like, well, this is an interesting concept. You know, I've never seen the concept of it like it was. And I kind of want you to do your pitch on here at the end because people need to know. And I wanted to circle back around to your book. But I really enjoyed it, and that's probably my pick of the week. And everyone else is going to have to wait until 2019. But it was a lot of fun. It was original, and I had a nice little sneak peek, and I can't wait till it hits retail shelves because it's definitely going to make an appearance on my channel. And hopefully I can get like maybe an autograph copy from you someday since we're now like best friends. So that would be kind of cool.
Yeah. There better be a few of those.
And a fairy riding a cat that made my night is all I know.
I want to say thank you so much. It ends on a cliffhanger, which I think all books should, especially #1s. It should leave you like, okay, yeah. And it's like, okay, I want to find out what's going on, and it did, and it's mysterious, and it's something totally different. I would have never been able to think of something like that. So hats off to you, my friend. It's awesome. And go ahead. I think we've covered everybody. Chad, did you have your picks of the week before, or did you want to just take?
I'll give you my quick pick of the week. My pick of the week is the Black Label trade, and I'm saying that because I know what Mr. Cicconi picks up at LCS. The White Knight. And then also, if you guys haven't read it, please, I love these guys. The Terrifics Keep them in your mind, your hearts. Read them. Please read them. Keep that book going. But before we go, I want to give you guys, I waited an entire week because we were in an interview. Well, unfortunately, DC didn't allow us to do interviews until after New York Comic Con. So Mr. Tom King and I had a conversation with Comics Misexplained. And I said, Mr. King, why'd you kill off Nightwing? And he said, Nightwing is my favorite character. I love him. That's why I was able to write him as Grayson. But the reason I did what I did was because the book sales were down and they were looking at canceling the book.
No, nobody ever stays dead in comics.
He said, I would love Nightwing to be the new Oracle and Tim Drake to be Nightwing. Boom, my mind was blown because all I could think was that Connor Kent is coming back with Tim Drake in none other than Peter Tomasi's Super Sons. So you heard it here first. It hasn't been said. Maybe tomorrow. But hey, New York Comic Con's going. I figured I'd give it to the core first. But if you guys haven't checked out Mr. Chad Cicconi, Fracture is amazing book. If you want to see where Action Lab started, that's where it happened. I was there the day that both books were released. It was awesome. Chad, I thank you for being on this panel tonight. I appreciate you being a part of the Comic Core. You are now officially a member. Look for your puppet and
Thank you.
And the floor is his, I think.
Yeah, Action Labs, Chad. We want to hear from you, so go for it.
Well, I'll be very selfish. My pick of the week is the Null Fairies #1.
Oh, there it is.
He's got a copy.
There it is.
Done.
Nice.
We did a couple of sneak previews for one for Baltimore, one for a show earlier. But the longer pitch of the Null Fairies is basically it's the story of the greatest of all the Queen's tooth fairies, which are called harvesters in this world, and the woman who's sort of the head of the tooth fairies suffers a very grievous wound in battle with some dark fairies, and she is stripped of her magical aura. She's stripped of her fairy magic, and she thus becomes the first and only mortal fairy who has to live as a non-magical aging woman amongst a population of eternally 20-something fairies who are all imbued with significant magical powers. So she has to learn to get by on her cunning and her intelligence instead of relying on fairy magic. So our story truly begins 90 years later when she is an elderly woman, and she is summoned back into service by the Queen when a shipment of the Queen's pixie dust, which is the responsibility of the fairies to provide to all magical creatures in the world, is hijacked, and two of the convoy pilots are assaulted, and one is missing and one is grievously wounded. So she's pressed back into service as the Queen's Inquisitor to solve this crime because she has become sort of the smartest of all the fairies because she's had to learn how to live without magic. And the story takes off from there, goes in some dark directions. There's, as one of you pointed out, there is implications of sort of racial tension between different breeds of fairy and the allocation of magic that they're provided by the Queen. And there is some interaction with humans who, although human children can see fairies, the human adults lose that ability and they cannot. And it goes into some dark places as well that I won't reveal until you read them, hopefully. But it's I think it's an interesting take on the traditional fairy tale. And I've tried to weave in a lot of aspects of, age, someone aging, and someone having to rely on things that other people don't.
I'm totally sold on getting that book.
So I'm going to give a little quick shout out. This book, I feel like Tosh point oh, and I want to say, na, my hauls are better than yours because we read this before any of you, and it's freaking amazing. So, guys, I am going to tell you this is going to be a top pick when it comes out. Read it. It is awesome. It is absolutely amazing. And I'll give a couple quick shout outs to the chat. C. Wood is on there. I'm sorry. Trinity Comics. Brian Spaceboy is still hanging with us. Double S comic book reader. You are our brother from another mother. And with that being said, in the immortal words of Alex or whatever.
Hold on 1 second, Chad.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Paul. I forgot you. Shit.
Said no. Just since we've talked this book up so much, Chad. I think you said this is going to be in the November previews.
November previews for issue 1, release in January.
Okay, I just want to make sure people knew which
six issue story with possibilities for more afterwards.
That means that there's going to be more afterwards.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot.
Yeah. But the first story arc is 6 issues.
Hey, Paul, I gotta ask a question. How many times did I swear?
I don't think you dropped the F-bomb at all.
No, I didn't. It's because of my
your mom will be happy.
Guys, if you haven't subbed these guys up, sub everybody up in the chat. It's been real. We love you. And God bless. Keep watching. And peace. We'll see you next week.